What happens when a camp director doesn't have camp? The pandemic has uprooted all of us. It's unprecedented, caused us to pivot, turns our worlds upside down, pulled the rug out from under us. You know the drill. You've heard all of those words a million times. Listen in today as we chat about how we are coping with what feels like losing a part of ourselves. We often feel called to be a camp director, and when that's gone, we feel like we've lost part of our identity. Join us for the first episode of Beyond Camp, where we explore what our identity meant to us, why it was so important, and how we are slowly moving forward. This is hard stuff, but together we can do hard things. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp and our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we are here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we are here to go beyond camp with you. Before we dive into the details and go beyond camp, let's start with who we are at camp. I've been an overnight camp director of nonprofit camps here in Ontario, Canada for the last 6 years, working in a variety of overnight outdoor education positions before that. I'm actively involved in my provincial camping association and love nothing more than hearing camper and staff stories and wearing outrageous costume pieces as everyday clothing items and causing a little bit of chaos with campers.
Similar to Rachel, I have been involved in year-round overnight camping and outdoor education for 7 years in Western Canada, and involved in my provincial camping associations for 3 years. At camp, I love to spend time with the campers, sitting with them during meals and downtime and helping out at programs. Really, any time I can spend making connections with the campers one-on-one.
As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and be sure to check out the show notes at GoCampPro/BeyondCamp. Now, let's get started. Today, Cassie and I are really excited to have this conversation focusing on identity lost as a camp director during a pandemic. We've all heard the words unprecedented and pivot thousands of times. We're all tired of hearing those words. Today, we really want to dig into the theme of a sense of a loss of identity, a loss of sense of self, feeling anchorless, and our loss of routine. This has been a really tough time for both of us. And so we felt it was really important that we started talking about this, that we started talking about this common theme that is being shared by so many people during this time. For myself, I was laid off at the beginning of April, and I knew that that meant no camp. And it was an interesting time because I found that out, and then I called up my manager and I said, I need you to say the words, camp is canceled this summer. For me, I needed to hear that to know and to feel grounded in that. And then I felt this sense of acceptance. And then I moved into this phase of numbness. And for a month or two, I just worked my way through the pandemic, feeling numb. And then June hit, which is typically our pre-camp time. And it brought up all of these new emotions. I felt so lost. There were all these milestones that I would usually have during the year, especially leading up to camp, that anchor my year and give it some rhythm. And those were all gone. And as I talk to other people, that seems to be a really common theme. And so we want to have this podcast so that we can and go beyond camp so that we can explore all of our different identities. And it's such a unique time for us to launch this podcast. And so some people have asked, why now? Why talk about Beyond Camp now? Podcasts don't usually launch in the summer when they're related to camp because we're all too busy and honestly often have terrible Wi-Fi. So who can download the newest podcast episode? But we recognize that we need to delve into this now as we're living it out, and that camp intersects with so many different parts of our lives, and we want to delve into those in future seasons and really talk about the things that are affecting camp.
Yeah, it's been such a journey these last few months. I was notified that my new position that I had taken at the beginning of the year didn't survive the cuts they were making at the end of March, and I had a couple weeks left. And I spent a lot of time just kind of quiet, sitting in this unknown, kind of almost feeling like I'm floating with not really sure. But I also felt this like impounding societal expectation to just find a job, to do that now. And, that wasn't a great idea, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I did find, volunteer opportunities, things that would keep me connected. And that's kind of how I remained involved, but it was hard. And I'm still kind of day to day, each day, taking it as it comes and, filling that time with something that's meaningful to me.
Yeah, and it is so hard, and that's not something that we plan on shying away from as part of Beyond Camp. In this episode and in episodes to come, we're going to dive into those hard things. We do it at camp, and we can do it here. And I think a big part of this is that we've needed to find language to talk about what we're feeling, and we want to provide other camp pros with the awareness that you're not alone. You're not the only person going through this. We're all walking different paths and experiencing it differently. But for some of us, it means that we have no summer camp at all this summer. For others, it means that we're running a very different method of summer camp. We're doing family camps or retreats. For some folks, it's all virtual. But we're hoping that folks can all find something to relate to here because it is such a tough time for all of us. The pandemic in its nature has driven us apart literally into bubbles of isolation like we've never experienced before. And so we want to give folks a space to come together, to explore topics, give us brave spaces to ask questions, explore identities in different parts of ourselves, and build connection through conversation here because we're not alone in experiencing this.
Yeah, and that's something I really noticed is people didn't want to be alone. They wanted to connect, but what they did want to do was offer help, and that was like so hard to hear. Everybody wants to help, and in the camp world, we're doers, we're helpers. This is something we strive to do. But when everybody's offering you help in a situation where there's not much they can do to physically help you, unless they can provide you with what at the time I felt was like, unless you have a job, like, please just go away, give me some space right now and let me be. And kind of just, I would, try to end that conversation as quickly as possible. But I found for me, it was really finding the spaces and the connections in the community with the people who really could understand and express empathy over sympathy and could just hold that space to have those conversations that were a little bit more meaningful and intentional and were beyond the what can I do for you right now.
Yeah, it's been remarkable to watch the camp community come together through this and connect across borders here in Canada, provincial borders, state borders, international borders even. I mean, Cassie and I are on opposite sides of Canada and have really been united by our journey through this, which has been so special. And I found it interesting because this pandemic, which has driven us so far apart physically, has in many ways drawn us closer together emotionally. And so often we give younger folks,
Yes.
like teens, a hard time about making all of their friends online and being on their phones all the time. But yeah, we've proven through this that we can build community in these online spaces, and it's been a really beautiful thing, and I'm really excited to continue that, especially as we realize that this summer is going to look so different for all of us. I mean, we're already into the first week of July, which, like, for me, we'd be launching our first week of camp this Sunday, and it's really quite shocking to me that we're not, and I don't know that that's sunk in yet. I was heading into my fourth summer directing at this camp, and I was really excited for it. And I have this mix of emotions right now. I feel sadness about not experiencing it. And then, like, so there's all the grief that comes with that. But then I also have this sense of excitement that I'm not going to be at camp this summer and that this is going to be different. And then
Yes,
I
so
feel that,
much.
so I have this excitement of like, oh, I could do some of those things I've always wanted to do. And then comes a huge wave of guilt right after that, where I'm like, you know what, if I was a good camp director, a good camp pro, I would want with all my being to be at camp right now, and I would like just feel terrible, and I wouldn't have this excitement that I'm feeling, and so I must be a terrible camp director. And I don't think that's true. I think it's important to honor those mixed emotions and to hold space for all of
Mm-hmm.
those. And I think it's also really important to note, for me, it was a government decision here in our province that overnight camps couldn't run, as it was across much of Canada. And it's really important to note that we can support those decisions to not run camp, whether it's government or organization, but still be grieving and holding space for that loss that we're feeling this summer. And I think that's so important, that just because we know we're being safe doesn't mean that we're not also losing something.
Yeah, it's hard, and I found it really difficult because I was at a new camp. We didn't have registrations. We didn't have a community of people. That's what we were going to be doing this first summer. And we pretty early on kind of decided, pandemic and new camp don't go together.
That's
It was,
reasonable.
yeah, I figured, and I actively supported that decision. I was like, yeah, let's not try to go virtual. Let's not try to do something like don't try when we don't have that already existing community. Let's work towards opening camp in a stable environment where we can do better and be more prepared for it all. And I was excited to have this, like, to have this job, but not have camp, but still working towards camp. And then there was this like, oh, but everybody else has camp. And, you know, maybe I shouldn't do anything but work towards camp and not, you know, just kind of continue to work like I would be if I were at camp, and not, you know, not do anything and just live as if I were at camp. And, but that I shifted and was like, as we did and everything happened, I eventually, like, when we weren't operating and having a job that was solely operational, my job did get cut, and it was kind of like, okay, this is different now. Now it's not my choice. And that's when it started to get hard, and where, you know, bigger emotions started coming up. And then it was like, well, what am I going to do? What is it? And it's going to be like understanding that it's going to be different. And then there's the moments of like, but if I was at camp, I would be doing this. And if I was at camp, I could be doing that. And, oh, I'm not going to see this kid this summer, or that staff member that I had hoped to recruit and bring onto the team and watch them grow. And I think those are the things that really are challenging me of like, these things that I look forward to witnessing and working towards all summer just aren't going to happen.
Yeah, there's so much loss there, as you said, and you mentioned sort of like those heavy emotions, and I think so much of that is tied into identity loss. So let's
Yes.
really dig into that, because that's a big topic, and I think a lot of
Oh,
us are
for
feeling that.
sure.
And as we said earlier, we're not going to shy away from hard things. So often at camp, we teach our campers how to deal with hard things, whether it's conflict, whether it's homesickness, and so we're going to do the same here, and we're excited for everyone to join us in that. So when I think of identity loss, when I first heard those words associated to not being at camp this summer, I was like, yes, that's exactly how I'm feeling. I've really had the sense of like, who am I now that I can't describe myself as a camp director? Um, you know, for the past over 10 years, I would say, like, camp and I have been so intertwined, and I've really prided myself on that. You know, I've prided myself on listening to all the camp podcasts, going to the camp conferences, always thinking and learning about camp. You know, like even the camp songs are like just always in the back of my head, for better or for worse, depending on the moment. And so I really wove that camp identity into my like everyday identity, which in some cases was really wonderful. And now I'm realizing that it's okay to have some separation of those identities, and that I have other identities which I've maybe put on the back burner or haven't honored and brought into the light as much. And now is the time to really spotlight those identities.
Yeah, I've been really struggling with that same of like, who am I now? Now that I don't have camp defining me, because it was, you know, it's more than who we are. It's what we do. It's who we are.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of camp people might resonate with that, because we give, we don't just do. And really trying to find that sense of purpose moving forward, and kind of discover what parts of me were left behind when I really dived into the camp world and dedicated myself towards this. And then it has me really wondering about how we tie our identity to our job, and what that looks like, and where that is, and how we can identify that way, and how then we can move forward identifying without that connection to our job.
Yeah, that's so important. And when I really thought about that, I thought like, why am I so tied to this job? Because you know, camp is so much a part of our life, but it's also a job, you know, and it pays the bills, hopefully, for many of us. And so that part's important as well. And I think it's because camp gave me a place where my unique talents and interests were valued. And I felt like I could really be myself. And I honestly think it comes down to a fear that my strengths and talents that I am able to showcase so well at camp won't be valued anywhere else, or that I won't be able to communicate them in a way that will let me do something other than being a camp director. And it's not that I want to walk away from camp forever. It's that honestly, right now, there may not be any camp jobs for me in the like foreseeable future, even in the next 3 to 6 months. And that's okay, because, you know, the world is figuring itself out, and I found other ways to be connected to the camp community. But I have this fear that I'm just not going to be able to share and communicate what I'm good at in other places, and that other folks won't see the value in that.
Yeah, I know that's something I've struggled with, of like writing down what that skill transfer looks like. I know I've been looking for some jobs lately, just in the process of how things are moving and progressing in our area. A few places are looking to rehire, not camps, but other things. And I've come to terms with, my next job isn't likely going to be directly involved with camp, but finding a way to write down those skills that we have as camp directors to make them more palatable to the general public and recruiters, it's difficult. It's,
Hmm.
it's been a really difficult journey to make everything more realistic and to meet the general community. But thinking about like being a camp director, it's a lifestyle to me. It's something I chose, and it's something I love.
Totally.
It's really this feeling that of like that it's what I know. It's my daily routine. It's my goals. It's my home. It's my community. And it was all kind of taken and pushed to the side, and now I'm just here. And it really, did a lot of reading on this because I was like, how is this something that other people experience? Like, or is it just us? And we've got some notes and some articles that we'll add to the show notes for you. But some of the ones I found the most helpful were with the Harvard Business Review. It's an email subscription that I subscribe to, and they send you a lot of great content. But there was one that talks about when your career becomes your whole identity. And that one really spoke to me a lot of like, wow, as camp people, do we let our career become us? And then like my whole mind was shifting into this idea of how do we value our relationship with ourself? And does that
Mm-hmm.
play a role? Like, do we give up part of who we are and let go of that relationship a little bit just to be better at what we do? So how do we build up this relationship with ourself, because it is the most important relationship that we have.
Yeah, I love that. And I think as a young camp director, I've often felt that I needed to be as like thrown into my work as possible. Like I needed
Yes.
to be fully embedded and fully present 24/7 every single day that overnight camp ran. And honestly, it wasn't always sustainable. And I think now it's sort of forcing us to take a step back and be like, where are the relationships here? How do we see ourselves? So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like you give, and you just like, you're like, you know what? If I only get 4 hours of sleep tonight, that's okay, because somebody else's experience is going to be better.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we have to take care of ourselves. Um, we all know those phrases like put on your oxygen mask before you put on somebody else's, but then we're like, we're camp people, we can do this, and we can drink more coffee and have less sleep. And I think that this is a really important lesson in work-life balance through all of this.
Oh, yes, so much.
And I think that the pandemic has also been really hard for camp folks. And you mentioned this earlier, camp often gives us our purpose. For me, camp is the place where I can help people. It's where I know I can make a difference. And sure, I can do that in other ways throughout the year, but I really know how to do that. And I have all the tools at my disposal to do that during the summer. So when the pandemic hit, my initial thought was, how can I help and what can I do? And I live with some folks who are more vulnerable, so I couldn't be out there, volunteering anywhere in person. I couldn't be on the front lines because I had to protect the folks I was living with. And I found that really challenging. So I was like, okay, I can turn to camp. Like, how can we make camp safe for the summer? And then I lost camp, and I thought, now I have no idea how to help. And I felt like I've lost my ability to help people, my way to be connected. Um, and I think it's a really hard loss for camp folks because we're not just losing like one event or something that then is followed up by
Mhm.
like a series of things we can't experience, and then we have another loss. We're losing like 2 or 3 months, possibly more, altogether. And often camp professionals use the phrase, we're living 10 for 2, like 10 months of the year for our 2 months of summer. And camp provides this incredible anchor for the year. And now we don't have that. And it's just this like huge sense of like, where am I going? What do I do? And I know for me, it almost like doesn't feel like summer right now because I have all these sort of traditions and rhythms that I've built into my year leading up to camp. For example, my partner and I,
Yeah.
we have this like spring bucket list that we build every year. And it's like, I don't know, 10 or 12 things that we try to do before we head off to summer camp. Things that people would usually do during the summer, like go to a barbecue, sit on a patio and have a drink, that sort of thing. And we just didn't build that this year. And so I just feel like I haven't had the lead up, so I've missed all of these stepping stones to summer. So it is hotter outside. My dog doesn't want to be walked at noon anymore. But is it really summer yet?
Yeah, it's hard. And when you mention that, I'm like, oh, well, couldn't you just do that bucket list now? But with the state we're in, it's just some of those things might not be available yet, depending on, where you live and what you do. But I'm also thinking, like, because we've talked about this a few times before, and I'm like, what could be on my summer bucket list, and how can I use that tool to kind of help me experience what summer might be without camp.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and like I had the same kind of idea around traditions that were based around camp, and I always thought of it as like January is not my new year. My new year is sometime in the fall when I'm done writing all of my reports and have all the data collected on the year. And so I work on this shifted calendar, and I'm just like a little worried about what that's going to look like this year, because I don't have, there's not going to be a defined line of like, okay, it's time to start prepping for 2021 because I'm done with 2020 now. And, you know, when our quiet time is winter, and that's when I usually go on vacation and do all of these other things, and I'm like, what's that going to look like, and how am I going to kind of adjust for that and make that work? And it just has me thinking about more about who would I be if I never was involved with camp, and what are those parts of me that you know exist without camp, or were part of me before camp.
Yeah, these are such big questions, and I'm so excited to continue to dive into these with you. We're going to take a quick break now to thank one of our sponsors. The Women in Camp Summit is going virtual for 2020. Save the date for December 2nd to 4th, 2020, where women camp professionals from all over the world are invited to attend this intentional and empowering space for growth, support, and professional development designed to meet the needs of today's women camp pros. Explore what the Women in Camp Summit has to offer at acail.org today. I first attended the Women in Camp Summit in 2019. I have so many great memories of it, but the mentor chats were one of my favorite. You get dedicated time to sit down with a women in camp professional who's been in the industry for years and who is so willing to impart their wisdom on you. I made some incredible connections there. It's where Cassie and I first met, and today we're launching our first podcast. We also are given brave space to talk about some of the tough things facing women in the camping industry today. There's something for all women at the summit. We hope to see you there virtually in December. Check out acail.org today for more info. All right, let's dive back into this. So, beyond camp, who am I? Our identities. Why talk about this now? Why pick at the beginning of July to dive into this really heavy, big topic? And as we mentioned before, I usually would be up at camp right now. And we recognize that some folks will have been at camp for a couple months, some folks may be just starting. And so that's a really important time during our year to recognize and to honor. And so we imagine that we aren't alone in this. I mean, right now I'd be wrapping up my staff training, we'd be just launching into the summer. It'd be such a special time, one of my favorite times of the whole summer. And I'm not there. And as well, there seems to be this real appetite in the world right now to be talking about different issues around identity. For us right today, it's about identity loss, but there's great appetite for discussion around race, around LGBTQ plus issues. And we want to dive into those so we can really talk about how these issues intersect with camp life, because they don't exist in their own little bubbles. And now that the world is so familiar with the term bubbles, it's time to burst those and bring them together as virtually as we can.
Yeah, and like as we think about like this is important to talk about now, no matter where we are and what we're doing in camp, because we're all figuring this out. We've all had to figure it out, and we've done it in a pretty supportive environment with the use of Facebook and Slack and different things that have existed to help us figure it out together. But I also feel like sometimes you still feel like you're figuring it out by yourself. because, at some point you have to do the work. You can't just copy and paste everything.
Exactly.
But like, we're here together, and we want people to know that, these emotions you're feeling are valid, and that you're not alone, and, connect with those people and hold space for each other to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is tough stuff. It's hard stuff, and we're going to dive into it together, hold space for each other and hold space for you so that we can continue to have these conversations. For me, I'm at a really strange transitional point in my life right now. So as I said earlier, I was laid off and I was just recently recalled to work, but into a new position away from camp. And I found out that my former position had been eliminated. And so it's this strange collection of emotions where I'm both excited to have a new position and to have some more purpose and something to work for to move forwards with, but also a
Yeah.
sense of loss of my old position while the world is still so up in the air. And so I'm really sitting with those emotions, and I know other folks maybe as well, especially if they have to take a different job perhaps outside of their original organization right now, um, because you have to do what you have to do to get through the world right now and to get through your day to day. I know for me, I've also been working on projects for my provincial camp association as well as for other camp pros, and I've been pretty involved in the COVID-19 Slack space and the Facebook group. And those have been really wonderful ways for me to stay connected to the greater camp community and continue to learn and be engaged with that. And that's been really meaningful for me. And I've developed some phenomenal relationships virtually through that. And I look forward to one day being able to celebrate those friendships in person. And I'm also, all that aside, that's sort of more my professional life. Personally, I'm hoping to enjoy summer in a different way this year. The weather's been beautiful. Recently, I sat out on my back deck and read some books in the month of June. I read more than one book, and they weren't related to camp. That's literally never happened
And you did
before.
this in June.
In June, yes.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I also felt well rested, so it was pretty phenomenal. And then I'm also just living out my dream of hosting a podcast, which has been lots of fun. So in this time of great turmoil, there's things that are really challenging and things that I'm also really enjoying. And I'm trying to hold space for that excitement and allowing myself to feel that excitement.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we allow ourselves to feel excited,
Mm-hmm.
because it's difficult when you're also struggling with this feeling of identity loss and guilt. But being excited, that's okay to feel. It's something that I think we need to normalize as we move forward, something that we need to be comfortable saying. And I'm excited for this summer. And now that's something that I've learned that it's okay to say. It's taken practice to say, I'm excited to go out and do these couple of things, and as the BC opens and everything, I'm actually maybe I should be getting some gear and going out and going camping. I have to get gear because I've always borrowed gear or not had time in the summer to do
Yeah,
these kind
fair.
of things. So I'm excited to, go on a solo camping trip and take some books with me and take some podcasts pre-downloaded and just sit in the woods and, strangely enough, not have to listen to children screaming. Kind of excited for that. Where you can actually just sit in peace.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's challenging to feel those emotions of the positive emotions. Then on the flip side, we have those what are perhaps traditionally more harder emotions to cope with. And it's really important that we're holding space for that grief and for that loss.
Yeah.
I think back to where I would be right now and what I was so excited for going to the summer, on a professional side, it was one of my biggest summers yet. We had a large staff team, big numbers, I had new responsibilities, and I was really excited for this. I was going to be delegating more and mentoring to some folks who are stepping up into leadership roles. And I was just so stoked for this summer. And then on the personal side, we were trying to buy a condo. The first week of the pandemic, the first weekend, we saw a couple of condos, and then obviously that got put on hold, so that never happened. And so it's been really hard. Those are big things to lose, things that I had worked many years for, both on the professional and the personal side. You don't just decide tomorrow that you're going to go buy a condo, right? We put years into planning that. That was all taken away. And yeah, you said once before to me, Cassie, it was like having the carpet ripped out from under you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah. And I felt bad saying those words. I was it's like everything has just been ripped away from me. And I felt horrible saying that. And, but you know what, some of it was by choice, but some of it wasn't. And like the government saying, nope, no overnight camp, that kind of helped be like, okay, they also don't agree with that, with moving forward with this summer. And that kind of helped it, almost soften the blow a little bit. But it was like, I didn't lose these things because I wanted to lose them or because I gave up on them. It was kind of like everything was just taken. And I think it was like a really big impact for me because I was moving into this new job. I was like looking forward to like crushing this dream job, the job that every camp director wants to have, of like building a camp from scratch. And like I was supported by a large company that was just like, yeah, you want that? Sure, here's some more money. Like, where in camp do they just like give you money?
That is the dream. Wow.
It was phenomenal. And I was going to get to create the culture with that first year of staff and like really build it and like live next to the ocean in a cabin, like, and dive into like, I wanted to really dive into like professional development, but the ones that aren't associated with camp, to really build my skills outside of camp as well, because I feel that's really important. And then additionally, this new job had given me the ability to become financially stable and finish, the last round of debt that I had to pay off and start building my savings so I could move on to some of those bigger financial goals in life. And, all of that just was like, it was there one day and gone the next. And like, I think that's really what hit me the hardest, of like all of these personal and professional goals just kind of had to be completely restructured, and it took time.
Yeah, and it doesn't move in a linear fashion either. I think
Oh
back to
gosh, no.
when I first found out that like camp wasn't happening and that I was going to lose my job, I was devastated. I'm not a big crier, but I cried writing emails. I cried before bed. Like there were so many tears, and I was just in like the state of shock.
Yeah, I
Um,
cried for like it was days of just like I couldn't talk about it without crying.
yeah, and then and I still feel really guilty about this, but I found it challenging to support others who were grieving or who were angry about the decision. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which was really a fascinating place for me to be, because that's not typically how I would describe myself. But people were, like sad about like not being able to come to camp, or they're angry that we made the decision early. And I want to say, but my whole world is destroyed. And looking back, I'm like, no, Rachel, your whole world wasn't destroyed. You're going to be okay. You're going to move through this. But I couldn't tell myself that at the time. I was too caught up in my emotions. Which was a really hard place to be. And then I thought I'd made my peace, especially through May and then into June. Other folks were starting to experience the loss of camp as they made their decisions, because we were one of the first here in Ontario to make those choices. And so I was able to, say, come along with me, and like, I can help you through this. This is how I felt. This is what I've done. And that was really good for me to be able to help somebody else. But then I felt more lost than ever once we hit the end of June and into the start of July, when I realized that I would usually be at camp and I didn't have any access to those things that I normally would. And so now my feelings are just jumbled, and they come in waves. And there's those positive emotions we talked about with the excitement. And then also this like dread of like, am I ever going to get back to camping again? Or is that part of my life completely gone?
Yeah, and like just sitting like I am at times I'm grateful that I didn't have a staff to be supported through this. And then I'm like, oh, I should maybe feel some guilt about that because other people are having to do that. And maybe how can I support them? But I'm like, do I have the emotional capacity right now to support somebody else and have these conversations? And it was really hard. And, you know, I always continually think back to, there was a summer where I made a choice not to work at camp. And I thought I'd get a real job. And I was okay with it then. But I think that's because it was my choice.
Mm-hmm.
And this one isn't necessarily my choice. Am I okay with it? Yes, now I am. But, you know, camp then, when I made that choice, was just a summer job. It was what I did through university. It was kind of just the side of things. But now it's who I am, and it's what I do, and I'm just not sure what that'll look like now. And I'm not sure how this year is going to turn out. And I'm just a little confused about what's next and where is this going for us? And it's some days I'm like, yeah, it's okay. I'll be able to find another camp job at some point in the future. And then other days I'm like, this could hit us really hard. I might not be able to get back into camping. And it's just kind of like this constant back and forth. And, I try to find visuals that describe it. And like, literally, I may as well just take a pen and like scribble all over a piece of paper because that's what it's like.
Yeah, I feel that for sure. I thought it was interesting. You said, back then camp was like a summer job and now it's a way of life. And I think part of the reason we feel this like huge sense of loss, and we have so much that we need to grieve, and the sense of identity loss, is surrounded to camp provides us with a culture. And as camp pros
Yes.
who are in that full time, or who are in leadership roles, especially, it provides us with traditions and rituals, which as human beings we need, and they draw us together. They give us meaning. They give us purpose. And it's really hard to communicate the value of this to somebody outside of camp. But it's really
Yes.
that draws us back. Yes, we love to hear the children playing. Yes, we love to make a difference in the world. But those traditions and that culture that allow us to do those things draw us back and keep us returning year after year. They really provide us, they anchor us and ground us and provide us with touch points throughout the year so that when things are hard, we say, okay, like we're sorting through all of these spreadsheets because we know that this will enable more kids to come to camp or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And we don't have those anymore. Um, and so we're losing part of our culture. And I find sometimes folks outside of camping don't necessarily understand that. And we aren't getting that like sense of closure. The end of every summer is hard, but we have a sense of closure, whether it be a final campfire, whatever tradition your camps have.
Yeah.
And we're skipping that this year. And that's really hard. And I don't think it's something that we're placing enough value on right now, is that it's not just that we're losing our chance to run around and have fun and like jump in the lake or swim in the pool or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
We're losing like a family that we've built around us. We've lost that like camp family. And perhaps it's a bit of a cheesy saying, but I think it's really true. It's really important. Those are the folks that we choose to surround ourselves with 24/7 for, sometimes months on end. And it's not always perfect and it's messy, but it provides us with family and culture. And we've lost that.
Yeah, we definitely have. I know that camp for me was very much like a social part of my life as well as like what I did, because like I identify strongly as an introvert and I also live alone. Um, and I know at one point there was a lot of discussion on social media about, oh, introverts must love this time. Like, and it must be easy for them because, they're okay being by themselves. And yeah, at times, it might be a little bit easier, but we still value social connection as introverts. Like we still need it. We just need it in a different way. And camp really provided that for me because we have these meaningful conversations that go beyond the surface level. It really was that connection point for me, both socially and professionally, that really just kind of grounded me in my year. And it was the place where I was able to flourish, where my skills were valued. And like having all of these things just kind of disappear for a summer or maybe more, I think that's the loss for me, like losing that space where all of these things are identified and I can help identify in other people. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's part of my yearly routine, my daily routine. Like I love those moments when you see that light bulb just kind of like flick on for a
Yeah.
staff member and they get it and they're like, oh, this is why we do this, and they all of a sudden understand. And just like those are the things that I feel like I'm gonna miss and that I'm gonna like it's gonna hit me one day and it's gonna be like, oh yeah, that didn't happen this year. And like the stories the kids share at closing campfire, they're just like, you know, they're fun and they're funny. And then you have the one kid who just goes like, the 8-year-old who just all of a sudden just like goes so deep and you're just like, okay, this is why I do this.
Yeah.
And you have that like passion just like ignited in you to keep you going for those 10 months to get back to the 2.
So with the sense of loss that we're feeling, those special moments, that culture, that family that we create, it leads us to that question that folks ask camp pros all the time that I know I'm going to hear a collective dread, like groan from people when I say this. But so what do you do all year? It's just a summer job. And I think it's so hard for us to communicate this loss to people who don't understand camp in the first place. And so it's just going to lead them to that sort of statement that comes from, what do you do all year? That statement of like, well, it's just a summer job, or it's just a job. You can find another job, which in itself is true. Yes, there's other jobs out there, but it's more than a job to most of us, which is why we're sitting here today talking about going beyond camp. And I think for me, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I'm really worried that others won't see the value in the work that I used to do. Camp is the way that I connect with people. It's the way that I give back. And I've lost the place where I can do that. And I
Yeah.
don't know, I struggle with finding the words to explain that to somebody who's never experienced it. Um, to explain to somebody the relationships that I built, that I no longer have the place where those flourish, to explain the impact that I've made when I don't have that space anymore.
Yeah, like that question, it makes me angry, like,
Mm,
and upset. And I'm just like, why do I need to validate what I do year
yeah.
round? Like, people, like, I'm a camp director, yet people still say, oh, isn't that just like, you just get to play all summer?
Yep.
No, no, that's not what we do. And like, over the years, like, it just angers me so much that I've just literally, I ignore the question. I've like given up on it, on answering it and trying to educate people, because sometimes I just don't have the capacity to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been like, I think it took time for even my immediate family to kind of develop this understanding of what I do. But I think that's because they have seen me work through the summer, because I had previously had a job that allowed me to, work remotely for 3 months over the winter. So I'd pack up my office in like a milk crate, great Camp Pro tool, and like head out. And I was able to just go from there. And I would be posting, getting like all those winter tasks that we do, hiring staff, interviewing them, putting up job postings, setting up registration. Everything would happen while I was there. So they were able to see it happen. But I, over the years, have also found that like my closest friends are the only ones who get it, but those people also happen to be camp pros.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I had this conversation with a close friend who works in Alberta the other day, and she was telling me about a trip she has at the end of summer. And so camp ends on like Friday, Saturday. They're driving 15 hours to this family event. And then the next day there's a event, a party of some sort. And she's just like, I'm going to be exhausted and expected to socialize. Like, it's just like that feeling of like, people don't get what we do and how much, not necessarily just what we do, but what we give of ourselves to do our job and to do our job well. And it's just, it's frustrating. And I think that becomes hard because like, we want to help, and we then feel like obligated to participate in these things that people plan for us or expect us to participate in post summer or during the summer, when they're like, come join us at this thing and have fun with us. And you're just like, I'm so tired right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't. And it's hard. It's difficult to sit in that position and try to find that balance of like, I want more of a social life during the summer and I want to have better work-life balance, but like, I just have no more to give.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what we need is we need the ability to communicate that to other folks and to set those boundaries. And I'm hopeful that some of the words from this conversation will lead people to be able to have some of those better talks with the people in their lives that are important to them if they're not understanding what this sense of loss is all about. I know for me, being able to say to people, I've lost my job, but it also feels like I've lost part of my identity. And people are like, oh, wow, that's heavy. That's big. And even if they don't understand it, they get the weight of it. And that helps them
Mm-hmm.
empathize a little bit more with me. Or I say, it's really hard for me because I've lost part of my culture. Like I've lost these traditions that are really meaningful to me. And as a director, I was really excited to see some folks participate in for the first time. And now we don't have those. And that's challenging for me. And that also, it helps people start to be able to relate. For me, when I think about losing some of that culture, the final campfire of staff training for me is always really important. And we have a lot of like sort of rituals that fall around that. To me, that's more important than Halloween. Now,
Yeah.
for a lot of folks, Halloween is really important to them. So when I can explain it to them in that way, in words that they might understand, that's relatable, it can help with that. But if you can't find folks that understand, or you just don't have the emotional energy or the spoons to talk to people through this, find yourself some camp people who get it. That's been really, really valuable for me, is to find some camp folks who get it and to feel validated by them, for them to say, hey, it's okay for you to feel upset right now. Because it can be really invalidating and demoralizing when somebody's like, oh, you'll be fine, like it's just a summer job and like at least you're safe, so let's move on. That could be really tough when you're sitting with all those emotions. So try to find some folks to surround yourself with. For me, that's really helpful, that folks who get it. And then just, I remind myself all the time not to take it personally and to just walk away from those conversations sometimes, because sometimes I just need that boundary.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I'm just, as we talk about this and like helping people understand, what our job is and finding those words, it just makes me think this might be a really big topic that we might hold off on some of those conversations for a little bit later. But I also want to say that like some people get it and some people don't, like just straight out. And it's kind of like what you were saying, like, don't take it personally that people don't get it. Just let it be at times. Like, it's okay that they don't get it. And remember that like we are connected and we really identify as camp professionals with what we do. It really defines us. And sometimes explaining it to others that don't get it is just, it's more than we have the energy to do and to give. And there's so much around that.
Yeah, and so while we're encouraging everybody to dive in and tackle these tough things like we are right now, to hold space for each other, it's also so important to set those boundaries and recognize when you just don't have the emotional time and energy to spend diving into those topics, and to take care of yourself in that way.
Yeah. And like, this conversation can go so far, and like, there's so much we could talk about like the loss of identity, of tradition, of culture, of what we do and how we're connected to it. It's just amazing how much there is to go, but we are kind of getting to the end of our time, and time is important to us as camp directors, and we like to respect each other's time as well. So we wanted to kind of wrap up here and make our way towards the end of our podcast, where each week we'll end with what we're going to call our recharge station, where we want to talk about self-care. But we feel that self-care is important, if not critical, to one's personal wellness. But we also agree that the term self-care has been commercialized and monetized. It's more than relaxing or paying for a service. Not to say that it can't be that, but it can also be more. It's about filling your cup, your mug, your bucket, charging your battery, or stockpiling resources. It is more about what lifts you up and makes you feel your best. And I know Rachel and I have been talking about this quite a bit. And with our Slack moderation as well, there's been a lot of discussion around self-care, and you see it in the Slack in the daily brief that's coming out. But Rachel, what has kind of filled your bucket recently?
Yeah, so recently I was over at a friend's house and I was playing with their kids. They have a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old, and we were having a socially distanced water fight. So that's fantastic. You can toss water at each other and like use the hose with keeping that 6-foot distance. That's the perfect activity. And I left afterwards and I was like, wow, that like warmed my heart and filled me up so much more than I could have ever imagined, because I realized that I was missing play. So then I called up my friend and was like, can I regularly come and play with your children? And they were great with that. Um, so it was fabulous and the best self-care I had had in weeks.
Yeah, I think any parent would be like, you want to come play with my children? Right now, when a lot of kids programming has been canceled and moved to different platforms, they're like, somebody wants to play with my children that's not me. Awesome. Like,
Exactly.
here you go. For me, it's been a lot about connection recently. And I found this through some reunion calls with like really old staff teams, like from when I was first working in camp and first a counselor in working years and years ago now, with those in the front line, and being able to connect with those people and just reestablish those relationships. It was like it was yesterday that, I'd seen some of them last, and I have seen a couple of them here or there over the years, but just to have that group of people together in one space, connecting and reconnecting, it was nice. It felt comfortable. And it was this group of people who, established some really strong bonds years ago, but it was just fulfilling and felt comfortable and safe.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. So we want to thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us. So you can reach myself, Cassie, at cassie.bloy@stephanericard.ca. Rachel, how can our listeners connect with you?
They can reach me at kentr@girlguides.ca.
Remember to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. We also want to send a big shout out to GoCamp Pro for holding space for these conversations. And honestly, kind of putting that bug in our ear that this was a conversation and something that we could do. We want to thank the ACA Illinois team for their sponsorship and support of this idea. To our producer, Matt, for making us sound professional and amazing every week. And we want to thank you, our listeners, not for finding the time, but for making the time to listen. Your dedication allows us to keep moving forward. Beyond Camp is part of the GoCamp Pro podcast network. Please be sure to check out our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.